Well, I've been digesting the Nintendo Switch news and kind of going through the details online as I come upon them, and one thing that is really striking me is how poor the launch lineup is. And as you were watching that presentation, they kind of threw all these games at you, got you kind of excited in certain instances, but I think the fact that they didn't clearly indicate which were the launch titles was somewhat telling. And as I go through here, and this is as best as I can tell on the date that I'm making this video, we've got, just a paltry lineup here. You have 1-2 Switch, which is these are physical launch titles. 1-2 Switch, which I have absolutely no interest in. Seems like a tech demo gimmick that they should be bundling with the system. You have, obviously, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the big game, the one we've all been waiting for. Skylanders, Imaginators, and Just Dance 2017. And I believe that Skylanders and Just Dance have actually come out on other platforms. Not 100% sure because I don't really follow those titles or care about them, but I could have sworn that I saw people streaming Just Dance at some point. Now, there do seem to be some games that are, I want to say, download only or download and physical. If I look here on GameStop in their comprehensive bundles, they have a game called Redout, which looks like a flight game of some sort of a sci-fi flight game. Has Been Heroes, Binding of Isaac, Afterbirth, and there seems to be a Bomberman game, Super Bomberman R, I think, and again, not clear if that's physical or not. But as I went through that list, it hit me that this has to be the worst launch of all time as far as games are concerned. I went back, and as best I could, I looked through and tried to find console launch title lists, and this Nintendo Switch thing is really bad. As we kind of go back through time here, I try to find within sort of my launch memories, which really kind of begins with the SNES and moves forward. So, maybe the Atari or the Intellivision launch was worse, but I don't remember those. But kind of going through the history here, the SNES launch, I think, is still the best of all time, and I think it accomplished everything that we want to do with launch games. You want to have games that really sell you on the technical superiority of the system relative to what came before it, and you also want games that you can just sit down and spend a lot of time with. Not every game is going to be a gem, not every game is going to be a classic, but you want something that kind of justifies the purchase. After you make it through, you play the absolute system seller, you want some other games that you can fall back on. And I think the Super Nintendo was just a masterful system when it came to its launch games. Obviously, you had Super Mario World, one of the greatest games of all time. That was your marquee title. You had F-Zero, which was a system seller as far as graphical prowess. Pilot Wings, really underrated game that was, I guess, maybe your hardcore title, or at least the tactical title. But I put a ton of time into Pilot Wings when I could play it at friends' houses. And then they had Gradius, another shooter, which I did not play this particular version of it, and SimCity. So very, very solid launch lineup there. Even launch lineups like the N64 that only had 2 games, namely Mario 64 and Pilot Wings, that was enough to pull you through. But even some of the bad launches, it hit me that the Sega Genesis launch wasn't particularly good. You had Altered Beast. Thought that was a really bad game. Back then it seemed impressive, but it hasn't aged well. Last Battle, a kind of generic side-scrolling beat-em-up, I think based on Hokuto no Ken. You had Space Harrier 2, which was okay. Thunder Force 2, which was okay. Tommy Lasorda Baseball. Not great, but it gave you something, and it sold you on the technical prowess of the system. Things like the Sega 32X, according to what I'm seeing here, it had only Doom and Star Wars Arcade, but I remember being fairly impressed with Star Wars Arcade. I'm not going to go through all of these. If you have things like the Philips CDI, which was kind of a bad system in and of itself for the time. 3DO was a bad launch, only insofar as it seems to have only had one game, which was Crash and Burn. Again, available on launch. I think in the launch window it got Super Street Fighter 2 and a version of Madden, which was actually pretty impressive, as I saw that at a friend's house. The Saturn launch wasn't very good. It gave you the crippled version of Virtua Fighter. You had Panzer Dragoon, which I know a lot of people love, and it was kind of a marquee game for its time, but I still don't think it's aged well. Daytona USA, which was kind of a system seller for me, although I didn't buy it, but if I had the money to buy it, I would have picked up that game. But let's face it, even though I have a soft spot for it, not a great game. PlayStation launch lineup was weak in its own way. It had Ridge Racer famously, but it had some bad games. Total Eclipse Turbo, Street Fighter the movie, and a version of NBA Jam. Battle Arena Toshinden, which, again, looked cool at the time, hasn't aged well. But even, you have the great ones like the Sega Dreamcast. I would go so far as to argue that the Sony PlayStation 2 launch was pretty great. So it gave you the new engines for all of the EA Sports games, which was a very big deal. I know we hate sports games nowadays, but those were truly impressive at the time. Midnight Club, totally overlooked game, but it gave you a taste of what Grand Theft Auto 3 would become. You had a Street Fighter EX3, Tekken Tag Tournament. Street Fighter EX3 wasn't that great. Tekken Tag Tournament I thought was. You had another Ridge Racer game. You had Silent Scope. Just a wonderful lineup. Same thing with the Xbox, the original Xbox. Obviously, you had Halo, but those other kind of sports games, Dead or Alive, Project Gotham, which was impressive for its time. The GameCube, famously, not only did it give you Luigi's Mansion, but it also gave you Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2, which has held up amazingly well. I just played it about 2 weeks ago. Absolutely tremendous. So I can't really find in my years of gaming a worse launch of a major system. Again, something like the Philips CDI and the 3DO, obviously. Those were not that impressive, the Jaguar, but of a major system, and certainly of a Nintendo system. Heck, even let's look at Virtual Boy. I remember that being better than this. Let's see, as far as handhelds go, Virtual Boy, now it's on direct comparison, but it gave you Mario Tennis, which was very good. Red Alarm, which was not bad. Galactic Pinball, not bad. And Tolero Boxer, which I've actually never played. But Mario Tennis was actually pretty good again. A game you could sit down and play, showed off the prowess of the system. So I find myself in this position now with the Switch, and that is, I'm thinking of simply not buying it. And my expectations for the launch were, I think, fairly reasonable. I knew, well, actually, we didn't know that Breath of the Wild was coming out, but I kind of had the feeling that they had to release Breath of the Wild. It just couldn't be otherwise. And so now we have Breath of the Wild. I thought that the Mario game would be also released on launch to kind of give you two really amazing franchises that you could sink your teeth into. I think those really would have been tremendous system sellers. And then I also was under the impression that since this was a portable handheld hybrid, that we would actually get some kind of handheld game. It's not a AAA big screen game, but a Nintendo handhelds franchise in some form or fashion. And wouldn't it be nice if they had just put Mother 3 on there? Hey, we've all been waiting for it. It's a known property. Nintendo has the intellectual property. They've developed it. So just throw it on there as your handheld game. That alone would have been enough to sell me on the system. Or just kind of a run-of-the-mill RPG or some kind of Fire Emblem game. Maybe a version of the last 2 or 3 that they released on the 3DS. Something like that would have been enough. But it almost seems lazy. It seems like a miscalculation that you would get the motion games. And, the Breath of the Wild, I do want to play it. But I find myself now in the position where I'm saying, you know what, let me get it on the Wii U. Even if I have a few frames less than the Switch players, why pay $360 for the privilege to play it when I can play 60 and just wait for this lineup to fill up? And I think that's sad because even systems that I don't like, recent systems that I don't like the PlayStation 4, at least it gave you a little something like Resogun, and hey, for the first week, the Resistance game was kind of fun to play, and you had the sports games. But I just don't understand why Nintendo had such a weak and disjointed presentation. Now, they claim that, we're going to have more information, and I hope that they do. I hope that I'm wrong. But right now, I'm going to have to say that I'm going to pass on this system. And it was, I know I have the reputation of being kind of negative here, but this was a fanboy purchase for me. I just said, I don't care what they're going to do with it. Give me 2 games. Give me 2 games and a handheld game. Give me some compelling reason to buy it. I don't even care that they're going to charge for online, but just give me something that's not going to sit on the shelf. And I kind of think after Breath of the Wild, this is going to sit on the shelf for me for quite some time. And I've had that experience with the PlayStation 4. Honestly, even though I like the Xbox One better, I've had that experience with the Xbox One. Insofar as the exclusives that are really good for it are a little bit few and far between. So, yeah, the Nintendo presentation kind of put me off. I have to say it. And now I just find myself with this kind of nostalgic yearning for the quality launches of old, where you had that excitement. You knew that once you got that system into your house, once you unboxed it, you had the smell of the fresh electronics, you had a couple of games in front of you, and you knew that you were going to lose yourself in this world, and all the companies had to do were put out a few quality games. Now it seems, at least in the case of Nintendo, a lack of understanding of the marketplace, a lack of vision, and perhaps a little disorganization on the part of a company that used to be the king of launch day.